Good afternoon. Is that too loud?
No.
In the interest of everybody's tight schedule, I think we'll get underway. Welcome. Good afternoon. I'm Gene O'Hara, the Director of the Monfort Executive Professor Program here at the College of Business, and we're just so pleased to have you with us today to hear a very exciting speaker. Knowing the kind of crowd that you are, I would guess that in your high school years, college years, you've had some opportunities to step up into a leadership role. And because of who you are and what you've accomplished to this point in your academic career, I would guess that many of you are what we call natural leaders. Now, being a natural leader, you probably feel pretty comfortable. You seek leadership positions. But being a natural leader and being comfortable as a leader doesn't necessarily mean that you know or anybody else knows innately how to be an effective leader. And our speaker today is going to talk about the principles of being an effective leader so that when you leave here and you've got your degree, you're moving up in your career, and you get that opportunity to step up and be a leader. We want you to be able to optimize that opportunity. And that's why I think you're really going to enjoy our speaker today. Gus Lee is here. And Gus Lee is a nationally recognized ethicist, executive character coach, and best-selling author. He's been a consultant with numerous Fortune 500 companies and governmental agencies. And in fact, he is here in partnership today between the Monfort Executive Professor Program and the City of Greeley. And Bob Perry, he's right up there from the City of Greeley. We appreciate your partnership, Bob, in helping us to bring a speaker like Gus here today. And as I said, Gus spent the morning with the Greeley City leadership team, and so we're fortunate to be able to share somebody with the expertise that Gus has with you all as students. But let me tell you a little bit more about Gus. He attended the U.S. Military Academy at West Point and currently serves as the chair of their character development program. And he also holds a JD degree from the University of California at Davis. Gus Lee is the Chief Learning and Educational Officer for Integware today and has served as a corporate executive, senior deputy district attorney, and interestingly, as a U.S. Senate ethics investigator. Mr. Lee has authored 6 books, including the bestseller Courage, the Backbone of Leadership. So please help me welcome Gus Lee to the podium today.
Thank you, Gene, and thank you, Coach Parra. It's a great honor to be with you. Wayne, wonderful seeing you. It's been way too long. Decorated combat veteran. Wayne, please stand. 75th Ranger Regiment, Airborne Ranger Wayne Sanford. Please give me a hand. I know you hate it for every dollar. Thanks, it's for the community. That's a great bio. None of it's true, but I get invited to the best schools as a consequence of using it. I want to share with you that although I'm not a DA anymore and not a Deputy Attorney General, I'm still in the circle of hearing stories about law enforcement cases. You may have read last summer during the fires that the world's most famous detective team went camping up near Trailers Road in Estes Park. And what became of them one early summer morning? Does this ring a bell to anyone? It was about 2 in the morning, 0200, when the chief detective, homicide detective, awakened to look above. And if you've ever been in Estes during the summer night, there are no street lights, there's no light pollution. and you can see countless constellations. And he gazed upon that for a while, and then he woke up his detective partner next to him in the tent and said, I want you to look above. And tell me, Holmes, what do you see? And Holmes looked above, and he saw millions and millions of stars. And nothing more. So Sherlock Holmes says to Holmes, look more carefully and tell me, Watson, what do you deduce? And Watson bumbled and burbled, and he said, okay, what do I deduce? I deduce that there are billions of stars, and that's possible that amongst one of them there's a sun like ours, around which rotates a planet similar to Earth, and there could be sentient beings this moment looking down upon us as we gaze upon them. What do you think of that, Sherlock Holmes? And Holmes shook his head and he said, Watson, you have missed the obvious. Someone has stolen our tech. Well, I think that we've missed something obvious in the last 50 years in American culture. And in our brief time together, it is my intent to challenge you, to maybe shake you up even, to give you a small dosage of a military experience, which is transformative of what's inside the chest. Not only in the head, but also in the DNA that defines you as the human individual that you are. You ready for that? Is that okay? And with Gene's permission, I have also been given a license to question the content of what is taught in business. Not all of it, but some of it. There's a wonderful ethics program underway here in which UNC and Monfort are part. And you are to be very proud of that. And I'll also raise questions about the method of delivery of cognitive and intellectual content, particularly in business. That sound boring, but let's jump in. Let me start with this. Can anyone break down phila utia? Okay, that's okay if you can't. We'll get to it later. How about philosophy? What does philosophy mean? Now both have this root of philo, Philadelphia, Eagles, not so good. Better than the Giants. So what does philo or philo mean? Now there are a couple of attorneys here. We study Latin. Okay, minimus non curat lex. The rest of the book, we are running out. That's about it. Okay, philo means love. So hold on to that idea. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to define leadership, finally and conclusively. We're going to talk about my character. We're going to talk about leadership tools, and then get to challenges for you. All right? So here's leadership, right? How many people do you think are present right now? What's the estimate? 100? 150? 150. We went around the room, we had time. How many definitions of leadership do you think we get? Many, right? Many. Is that helpful in producing leaders? If we get to make up our own definitions? Not helpful. Not helpful. Playing tennis, or riding a bike, or running track, playing volleyball, if everyone figured out their own way to play each of those sports, would they be recognizable sports? If each person came to it with their own personal philosophy. Yet it is my experience in business schools, and certainly in law schools, that individual students are invited to develop their own personal approach to how to lead. As a result, many voices, great for diversity, but the results of leadership have actually been pretty poor. So why is leadership so hard to do? Someone help me out. Why is leadership hard? We have great schools. We have the largest higher education machine apparatus in the history of humankind. Leadership is on everyone's lips. There are thousands of books. When I told my agent, my literary agent, and my publisher, my editor, that I wanted to write a book on leadership, it was like, oh, please. You sell much better if you write novels and, adventure stories. Your first 5 books were about that. Why do you want to cross over into the world where everyone's an author? And we have so many books. And I said, well, no one has made leadership really behavioral. And until it's behavioral, it becomes abstract. Okay? So why is it hard to do? Everyone wants it. We usually recognize it when we see it. Why is it hard to do? Give me one reason. Please.
It's easier to define, it's easier to talk about, but it's practical application is definitely hard.
Yeah, and why is practical application hard? If we have so much theory, why is practice different?
I don't know, it's like if you were to write about hitting a baseball,
Yeah.
It's the difference between someone who's played it and someone who's never played it and tries to watch it play it.
There you go. Did everyone catch that? That's the perfect example. I usually use boxing because boxing for me became it was totally counterintuitive. The last thing I didn't want people looking at me, much less hitting me for 9 minutes in a ring, starting at the age of 7. But you can't learn baseball or golf or tennis or boxing by getting PowerPoint slides, right? It won't help. Or have small group discussions. Or do stretching exercises that simulate one of those sports. If you enter that ring or that court, you're going to be totally unprepared to execute. You will look foolish. And many of our graduates, when they hit the workplace, like me, as I did 2,400 years ago, look foolish. Because we don't practice. We hear, we take tests. Our cognitive intellectual apparatus is brilliantly illuminated, but we have no behaviors. We've learned no tools. If we have learned tools, we haven't practiced them. So ergo, my criticism and my challenge to Monfort and to all of you who are learners, find professors who will require you to practice the hard behaviors of leadership, because they are hard and they require guts. And head knowledge won't help. Theory of warfare will not help if you haven't practiced maneuvering, marksmanship, teamwork, and communication. You'll be a babe in the woods. Anyone who's played paintball knows that. Right? There's a science to all of this. I'm going to offer 4 reasons why leadership is hard. The first is, in this room alone, we probably have 50 varied and different definitions of leadership. So if we can't agree what it is, it's hard to develop. If we can't agree what basketball is, you're not going to be able to teach it or coach it or build teams, because everyone has a different idea. Okay? It's also because we have a persistent confusion between what's leadership and what's management. And that includes coming from the hearts and minds of people who are leaders and managers and have been doing it for decades. When asked to define the difference for an actual C-level exec at a major organization or a major senior executive in a government agency, there's a lot of I'm not sure. Because we don't know, and despite our vast learning, we haven't clarified. But the 2 ones in red are the most important. You've heard the 4th already. We don't practice the hard behaviors of leadership. We're not even sure what they are. Well, we're going to solve that today. I'm going to give you those behaviors. Knowing about them is just the PowerPoint. It doesn't mean you practice them. So it really requires practice, it requires guidance, and it requires a coach like Coach Perry from CSU, City of Greeley. The one that we can focus on for the moment is we don't teach character. We're not even sure what character means. It's sort of honesty, being a good person. And I argue with all of that. We've lost the meaning, the significance, the centrality, and the behaviors of character. As a result, we largely have a nation right now that's morally adrift. We have no common, shared moral center. Do you feel it? You're all a bunch of free-floating individuals charting your own path, hounded by an economy that sees you as wage earners, as economic beings. not as moral entities. Tell me if I'm wrong. The pounding of the media and the message from the street and the market is that you're a consumer whose only task in life is to find a career that will pay you so you have some sense of economic security. Am I right? So you can buy things and feel safe and raise kids and pay their education so they can do the same thing as you. Do you think this is what the Founding Fathers had in mind for us? To be IBWUs, interchangeable biological work units? So we go to college so we can know how to make money? We commit our lives to making money? Is that good to you? Maybe not. So let's question a lot about what's going on today, and then you'll make decisions about what you're going to do about yourselves. Okay, these are all different leadership definitions. Okay, they come from probably the most famous university in the world. They come from some of the most renowned leadership experts, published authors in the field, high recognition names. So these are all independent definitions of leadership. It's not the amalgam. Each of these authors is saying, my answer is the correct one. Forget the others. So which one do you think is yours? Is one of those yours? Is one of those really resonating with you? Everyone's wishing they were sitting in the front rows. Sure you people don't want to get in? It's nice and warm and get to answer all the questions. Do you like any of them? No? Do you dislike all of them? I bet you I get a hand over something. Are we in agreement? Yes.
I like
E, echo. Influence and motivate others towards organizational goals. Thank you. How many like that's one of the most popular leadership definitions in the United States today, therefore the world. How many like that? Thank you. What do you think all of these share in common? Please, yes, sir. They have a leader. Very good. Now what do they share in common in terms of what's missing? What do they miss in common? Yes, sir.
Practical application.
Practical application, thank you.
I was going to say a purpose.
A purpose. Well, how about organizational goals? Okay, that doesn't show up. Organizational goals on E. That could be a purpose, right? But it's not a vision. Say again,
How to influence purpose.
how to influence purpose. So if we took part of D and E, they might fortify. Yes, please.
it says what a leader should do, not what a leader is.
Yeah, it's sort of doing, and it doesn't talk about inner character. Who's the worst leader in human history, in your opinion? Anyone? Hitler. How many think Hitler? How many think Stalin? How many think Mao Zedong? How many think a president you really hate? Did Adolf Hitler motivate and influence and motivate others towards organizational goals? Yes, no. How many say no? So you're all saying yes, right? Or are you abstaining? Yeah, he did, right? He influenced and motivated an entire people, an entire nation, to declare war on humanity itself that resulted in what we now calculate to have been 100 million deaths. We grieve, as well we should, for 6,500 fellow Americans, young Americans, who have died in the war against terror across the span of 12 years. How many Americans died in World War II? Also young and our best. 420,000 in 4 years. Vietnam, 58,000 in 10 years. Korea, 53,000 in 3 years. Hitler was in part responsible for the deaths of 100 million souls. And he influenced and motivated others towards organizational goals. And he got really smart, well-educated people to completely cheer for him and destroy their children following him. Now, do you like that definition? Think of the executives who ran AIG and Smith Barney and Merrill Lynch and Goldman Sachs, who have stolen from the American economy. I used to be a DA and a Deputy Attorney General and a JAG officer. We used to put, armed robbers in prison. And sometimes they get away with $850. Well, they're dangerous individuals. I want you to think about how many have gone to prison for having stolen $22 trillion from the American economy. 140% of our GNP, annual GNP. 1.4%, 140% of the American economy, they stole without penalty. And they influenced and motivated others towards organizational goals. As a result, you struggle to find jobs. Think that's a good definition now? If leadership is supposed to be something to which we aspire, something you want to be, an effective leader, then maybe it should be made of sterner stuff than influencing and motivating others towards organizational goals. What if your organization is Enron? What if it's Bank of America? What if it's Credit Suisse? What if it's McDonnell Douglas when they know they're making an airliner that will kill them? Is it okay if we take a paycheck? Does that make it all right? So leaders must be made of better stuff than this. Because I can influence you, theoretically, maybe not you, but I can influence someone in this room by threatening you or by bribing you. What if I gave you a large amount of money? Would you do this? And you would consider it. People will do it for free just for the sake of an experience, for an internship. I can do it by coercion, I can do it by bribery, I can do it by manipulation or deception, by lies. I can influence and motivate you, right? By begging. So leadership should be made of sterner stuff than influence and motivation, because influence and motivation very quickly can devolve into really nasty human interactions. The worst that happens in work, the worst that happens in personal relationships, the worst that happens in families. So we lack character in these places. We have little portions of hell dealt out to us that we live with every day. And we've written character out of the equation. So I'm not going to, basically, as an ethicist, I would say, well, if you're influencing and motivating me to organizational goals, are they noble goals? Are they goals that inspire me to my best self? Or do they appeal to my venality and my greed and my fear and my selfishness, which are all present in my makeup and in yours? So take a moment, because we're going to eliminate the difference between management and leadership. I mean, how many are really happy we're going to do that? How many are distantly pleased? How many are totally indifferent? Really important for you to know the difference. To know it now, because if you're going to be a leader, you better practice now, not when you hit the street. You'll do it then. You want a template. You want a basic game plan of what that practice looks like so you can become one. Natural leader is more than being able to influence and motivate others and having charm and having a sense of authority about yourself, being smarter and quicker than others. That works for a long time, right up until the age of about 25. And after that, you've got to have better stuff. You believe that? I studied this. 2,400 years old, I have a lot of data, so take it on faith, okay? So take a moment and write down, there's a bunch of squares up there, a lot of data cells. But take a moment and just come up with, say, 2 actions, responsibilities, or behaviors that describe management and 2 that describe leadership. Take a shot at it. Go ahead and just write them down now. I want to thank you for sitting here. Andrew, thank you. Can I shake your hands? Thank you. All right. So if we were to use one word to describe management, what one word might you use? Organized. Very good. Yeah, management is about organization. So what word would we use for leadership? Get an A plus. Please.
Dynamic.
Dynamic, okay? That's good. So when I hear dynamic, I'm thinking of movement, kinetic, action, people, okay? Do you see it? Management, organization. Leadership, dynamic people. One is things, about allocating resources, management. The other is about people, relationships. Good not to confuse them, right? Because otherwise, if I'm a manager, I'll try to organize you as resources, as things, as interchangeable biological work units. This happens in healthcare, happens in the military, it happens in paramilitary organizations, particularly law enforcement. Happens in all stress manufacturing fields, where it's just, okay, that guy went down, he put another one in. Think of coal mining. In China, it's just a death sentence, like it still often is in parts of Kentucky. And we perfected this with human resources. HR, human resources things, human things. It used to be called personnel, it was considered too impersonal, so we call it human resources, sounds more scientific. But HR is a place where most people in corporations do not want to go. They don't want, HR has called you, that's not good news. It's not like, oh, that's wonderful, I'm really glad I came to HR. Because that tends to be the place where we're expected to be most humane, most compassionate, most understanding, and it's the most mechanical, I'm a recovery lawyer, and it's the most legally driven, the most litigation sensitive. Ergo, oftentimes involuntarily, the least human. Not by choice, but by unintended consequence. So, instead of going through every one of these, let me just pick the highlights. That truly, I submit to you that management is about critical thinking, rational analysis, the use of evidence and logic to produce short-term results. It is about allocating resources and measuring performance. It is about using authority to produce results, all of which are important. Unfortunately, these can be done really inhumanely, mechanically, dispassionately, impersonally, and then we're the IBWU. Leadership is about people, and instead about critical thinking, which is advanced by the academy, by higher education. It's about the thinking process that was used prior to the 1950s, I should say 1960s. Discernment really died in the summer of 1968, I was there. Sex, drugs, rock and roll, and critical thinking. I know I'm probably offending many of my professor colleagues here, and I apologize for that, replace discernment. In critical thinking, I need not ask myself what is the right answer, what is the moral answer, what is the principled answer, or what is the ethical answer. In critical thinking, and I've done 3 graduate programs, I went through, somehow they injured me, but I was able to survive them without ever using discernment. Discernment requires me to reason in the moral frame and ask, as a person of education, as a degree holder, which used to mean a great deal, a person of education, supposed to be a selfless model of high character in a beneficent society. What is the highest moral action? It doesn't mean I'll have the guts to do it, but I at least have to have the intellectual and moral horsepower to answer the question. We no longer ask our students to discern. It's a word we no longer use. I'll come back now to philosophy. So we identified that phila and philo mean love. Philadelphia, city of love. And brotherly is not really in there anyway. It's philo, phila, love. What is Sophie? Sophia, please.
The study of.
The study of. It certainly involves the study of. Thank you. Wisdom. Yet if you take a philosophy course at an average American or an outstanding American university, to include West Point, which is an institution founded on the education and the conveyance of character development, what will they say philosophy means? Love of, so it's love of wisdom. What does the modern academy, higher education, say it means? It's not wisdom. That word is out. Knowledge. So I've worked with philosophy departments across the country, including CU and not UNC, but CSU. And yeah, the head of that department will tell you that philosophy is the love of knowledge. What's knowledge? Gnosis. Not even close to Sophia. They don't sound alike and they don't mean the same thing. If this were a dangerous implement of some sort, you know, a tear gas canister or a pepper spray canister, and I trained in the knowledge, I have knowledge of its use. Could I use this for harm, having that knowledge? You bet. If I am wise, could I use this for harm? No. You see the moral difference? Wisdom is based on moral discernment and the doing of highest moral action. Critical thinking is producing the smartest, best supported argument. The result is our current political dialogue. We've now had 50 years, half a century, of kicking out discernment out of the academy and replacing it with critical thinking. And the leaders of this nation cannot dialogue with each other. All they can do is blame and become hostile, regardless of the cost to the nation. Is that leadership? Are you witnessing leadership? You're witnessing management of resources with emotional reactivity and critical thinking. Now, that's a broad accusation, but I am a proponent, a former proponent of critical thinking. I've taught critical thinking, and I've seen its consequence in me and my leadership decisions, and I have longed for leadership based on discernment. So I began practicing that which I did not know and that in which I was not confident. And I encourage you to do the same. We'll talk about this further. So, leadership, I would just emphasize that it's about the behaviors of character. It's It's not knowledge of management processes and protocols and policies, all of which are important to support sustainable systems. But if those sustainable systems do not have courageous leaders, those systems will fail, regardless of excellence in engineering. The Concorde was a phenomenal aircraft. It could go 3 times the speed of sound. But they had not protected it against the foreseeable damage that would occur when its unusually high-pressure tires blew up. Okay, where do managers struggle and fail? I'll give you these terrible statistics. I believe higher education does not teach character or its behaviors, nor require you to practice those behaviors. So when you hit the street, you actually have these behavioral tools that you've mastered and can teach others. Instead, you learn that they're absent in your own repertoire. They're not in your toolkit. The S&L, the savings and loan fraud of 1980, I was a prosecutor back then, resulted in the loss to the American economy, the GNP, not GDP, but GNP, of about 6%. So a substantial amount of money. Our current, meltdown, the 2008 grand theft, I don't call it the Great Recession, that was unarmed robbery. Stole $22 trillion from the American economy. That's, as I said, 1.4 times our annual GNP. Everything that we work in products and services times 1.4 was stolen from us. And those people went into government. They entered the Department of the Treasury. And all the money that we paid out of our tax money to reconstitute what they took off in profits was paid back so they could take bonuses. It cost the developing world and Europe 205 million jobs, according to the UN. If an American loses her job, the chances of starvation are virtually nil, unless there's a mental health issue accompanying it. You will not starve in America. You won't eat well, you won't live well, compared to Americans, but you won't die. In the developing world from whence I come, if you lose your job, children die. You worry about American influence in the world? How about going worldwide with our cheating and steal not only from ourselves, but take food away from children where they're on the edge of starvation? Where's the accountability for that? Where's the courageous leadership to address that? Instead, we talk about the recovering economy and the jobs are coming. Forbes says this year that the United States spends $170 billion on leader development every year. $170 billion. And that the return on investment of that 170 BB is a failure. We do not have leaders. We have lots of managers who believe in process and systems and policies and getting promoted. But we don't have courageous leaders who will resolve conflicts and solve moral problems between people and departments. Can you see yourself being individuals who can lead? You've got to be those people. We'll talk about that a bit. According to the International Center for Academic Integrity, the universal American cheating rate is now 70%. 75% of high school students routinely cheat, and an average of 70% of college students, business students, med students, law students, and grad students also routinely cheat. In 1960, the rate was 15%. According to Patterson and his research that led to crucial conversations, 98% of Americans are conflict avoidant. Not conflict averse, but they avoid conflict. In the 1950s, what were such people called? They weren't called conflict avoidants. We didn't have the term. Say again?
Pacifists?
Pacifists? No. Thank you, but no.
Cowards.
Cowards. Now, we don't use the term coward anymore because it's politically insensitive to cowards. So instead, are you cowardly? No, I'm just conflict avoidant. So we've legitimized fear and cowardice in our councils of government, and Even in the military, it's counted, it's allowed. We're trying to change that, but it's still there. Gallup's 2013 poll reveals that 70% of American workers are unengaged, and 30% of them actively oppose the workplace and undo the work of the others. So 30% do the work in the average American workplace, 30%. Guess how resentful they are. While 70% get paid but are unengaged, and 30% of the 70 undo the work of the 30. Estimated cost, according to Gallup, of this is about $500 billion a year. We're bleeding out for lack of leaders. First, we steal from ourselves, and then we get disengaged at work. Sound like a good equation? See the need for effective, courageous leaders? See the opportunity in Monfort to learn how to become an effective leader as opposed to one more manager to advance policies and systems. Okay, so what sort of solutions, countermeasures, would you devise for these problems that we just reviewed? And these are macro problems. These are not micro. They approach meta. The lack of character is a meta crisis. Do we have any historians here? Any professors of history? You know, if we could go back in history and advise the emperors of Rome, actually the proconsuls of Rome before they became an empire, the emperors of China, and the kings of the city-states of Greece, and give them advice from what we know so they can be perpetual states and not fall into corruption and defeat by foreign powers, which is human history. We'd have one answer. Maintain high character standards. That's all it takes. Then you don't have corruption in government, and you don't have corruption in the workplace. But if you give those up, you're about to become a historical relic. That includes us. So very quickly, just look at these. This is from one of the most famous schools in the world, the business school. And for $40,000, you can take this leadership course. Do you see character up there? Do you see practicing the behaviors of character? Do you see being placed in mock circumstances of stress and pressure and anxiety and having to make leadership decisions, which is what leaders are needed for? Do you see any of that? What I find ironic is that, number 3, form a holistic way to identify problems. Did you see the slides before? We got plenty of problems. You enter as a manager in any of the Fortune 1000 companies for which I've worked, you're going to have 50 problems a day. You're going to have to look for them. But you won't be tooled up to find their root cause and solve them. Now, I could spend a week going through these people. What they basically tell us, I mean, what we know of them is that they're really bright and wise people. Not only intellectually sharp, but they're strong in character. They are gifted by practice in discerning the highest right action and then doing it regardless of risk to self-interest. Do you not admire people who can do that? Who know the right thing to do and then do it regardless of cost of self? Right? So these are people who know how to do that in many cases I've known personally. What they all say, I'll sum up in the following way. Courage, which is character at the testing point, is the first of all human virtues. If you wish to be in a sustainable and happy marriage, if you wish to be successful parents of teenagers, if you wish your children to love you and be attached to you and care about you when they become adults, if you want to be appreciated and genuinely admired at work and in your workplace, you're going to have courage, moral courage. Because if you're cowardly, if you're just self-interested, if you are just about philia lutea, which is self-love and caring for the self, Maslow's self, I forgot the term now, not maximization, but fulfillment of self. If you think it's really all about you and what you want, I assure you, you will not be loved. You may be able to snare some money, but it'll be very hard for you. Because you won't have people who really care. Self-actualization. Maslow's self-actualization. By the way, it's called a theory because there's no data to support it. We teach you this doctrine. Courage is the first of all human virtues, for it alone guarantees the existence of others, such as respect, compassion, leadership, teamwork, empathy, love. If courage goes, love goes. Marriages fail because people in the marriage become chickens. They're afraid to solve problems and they're afraid to change. They're afraid to seek help. They're afraid to change. Fear, cowardice. If you are on that side of the river, on your left, and you're honest, which means you don't lie, you're honorable, you don't lie, cheat, or steal, you're ethical, you follow the rules, you're lawful, you follow the law, you're a good person. And I challenge you to not be a good person. And that's because you can be a total coward and be a good person. I was a rule follower because I was afraid of being caught. On the other side of the river of fear is the nation of courageous people. And these are people who do 7 behaviors that we're going to fly through with lightning speed. But they do hard, projective acts of leadership that are really tough in the workplace. They're tough in marriage, they're tough in families, they're tough in friendships, they're tough in the dorms, in apartments, on the street. They're hard everywhere. How great if you learned them now. So, yeah, this was caused by fraud. This basically says that the companies across the history of American capitalism that made the greatest amount of money over a span of 100 years, basically from 1890 to 1990, represented by the graph that ascends high up, they made 1,500% of the profits of the entire market for a century. That's a lot of money. 1,500% of the market for 100 years. And when Stanford Business School broke down what they shared the companies that made that much money versus the rest of the market, what did they find? Anyone? This is reported in Built to Last, 1994, HarperCollins. 43 million in sales, 26 languages. So it's slightly more than I've heard of languages. These were the companies that had high integrity. They out-earned the companies that tried to make money at all costs. Do you believe that? Stanford kind of didn't believe the data when they came out, but it was tested and retested, revalidated by the next study, Good to Great. Companies that do the right thing are led by courageous leaders of character who do the right thing. And they make more money in the long term than companies that just seek to make profits. Collins and Porras, the authors, expected that to change all of business practice in the world. And it changed nothing. In fact, American commerce became even more fraudulent. If you invested $1 in each of those graphs, the x-axis being the general market, at 64 years later, pull that, you get $415. If you invested in the intermediate squiggly graph, those are the number 2 companies, you'd earn $1,000. If you invested in the 26 companies that represented the ones that did the right thing, $6,356. Which one do you want to be? But you have to have hard behaviors of character in order to qualify. That'll kill everyone, so I'll skip that. I skip that. I'll just get the behaviors. I didn't make too much stuff for you here, but. Okay. If you do any of these 5 things, you want to be an effective leader, you got rid of them. So Jake, Blues Brothers, is about to be killed. He says, I didn't marry you at the altar because I ran out of gas, I didn't have cab fare, I had a flat tire, Tux didn't come back to clean, his friend dropped in from out of town, there was a flood, and there were locusts. Okay. No one believes that, yet we tend to make excuses, blame, denial, and go to anger and frustration. They don't work. Leaders don't do this. So if you have these behaviors, if we're in a program, we we'd actually go through an expungement process where you publicly agreed to not do these anymore. We don't have time. But you know what they are. We tend to all do them. Stop it now. They reveal you to be cowardly without you knowing. Okay, here are the 7 acts. The first is to discern, these are the hard acts that we don't teach managers, and therefore we don't have leaders. Is it that simple? I think it is. I was one of these managers who didn't know how to do this. So number 1 is to discern, morally reason the highest moral action. Very hard to do. Second, do the highest moral action, regardless of risk itself. You can say both of these require guts. It's more than keeping your nose clean. You got to really figure out the right thing and then do it. And then the next 2 are to teach others from that highest moral action. And then to correct myself morally every day. These are easy, right? They're simple. They're not easy. Simple, not easy. The next 2, respectfully address wrongs in others. Can you imagine doing that? 150,000 financial executives knew about the great theft that took $22 trillion and 12 million jobs from us and has made our economy a cripple. Very hard to get jobs, that's the test. There aren't jobs. Not for people with degrees and hardly for people without. 150,000 people knew about it. How many whistleblowers, American whistleblowers with college degrees? 0. We're afraid to correct others. Fear. Fear rules. And you have to respect and condition all people. You have to trust them. You have to honor them. And lastly, solve problems at moral root cause. This is something you need to practice now. You have to know discernment to do it. We don't really teach this either. We teach band-aids. We teach system repairs. What I would ask you to do, if you're able to capture this very quickly, is grade yourself from 1 to 5 for each of those behaviors. Can't use number 3. 5 is you've mastered it, 1 is you've struggled. Okay, so everyone take a breath. How was that? That was sort of a mock 2 through character 101, and it's a 501 level course. So thanks for bearing with me on this journey. Do you have any questions or complaints? Yeah, it has to be some pushback. Everything I said is countercultural. Please. Oh, yes, yes, sir.
When you say morally, you defend morals because those change persons.
Yeah. How would I define morals when every person has a different view? I don't have time to prove it to you, but conscience has been proven by psychologists, clinical psychologists, to exist. When we establish universally what we consider to be right and not right, and in tests we do that which mimic role-playing doing that which is not right, and we do blood draws, our blood is filled with the chemistry of remorse, epinephrine, cortisol, stress hormones, adrenaline. When we do the right thing, they're not present. Did conscience tell the test subjects not to do the things that they're told to do in the role plays? Yes, they did them anyway. The body precognitively, involuntarily injects drugs and poisons into our system from the stress of that experience. So I'm number 1. Number 2 proof, Wharton School of Business, University of Pennsylvania, did a 14-year study, 65 cultures, 62 certified by the UN, 150,000 subjects, 18,000 investigators, in-country investigators, and determined across 62 certified world cultures that there is great unanimity, not diversity, but unity around what is right. Now, around religious issues, no. But about the treatment of people, about honoring people, respecting people, caring for people who work for you, having compassion, having the guts to call injustices universal. That's more. One last one. See, we can talk ourselves out of moral because we're different. And it's cost us terribly. It threatens this country. You know, if a foreign power, if the Taliban or Al-Qaeda invaded us and stole $22 trillion from the American economy and stole 12 million of our jobs, and disemployed 205 million people around the world who are connected to the United States, we would fight them. And we're taking this like sheep. And we don't even have the language to understand what's going on, or to change it. You must change it. I've had my 2,400 years. You have yours, and your children have theirs. Are you prepared? Are you equipped? Or are you just going to follow the baby boomers lockstep off this cliff? I don't know. Listen, you guys can do it. You're equipped to do it. It's inside each of us. I'm very proud of you. Wish you the best as you lead courageously. Thank you very much.